open it up. There it goes. Are we good on white balance?
Yeah, you can. Fine, thank you.
Evan, we open? Open?
Did he say yes? I
we
didn't
did-
hear him.
You're live.
Okay, or do we have everybody admitted, or?
Yeah.
Everybody good? 5, 4, 3, 2. Hi, I'm Jamie Court. I'm president of Consumer Watchdog, and really proud to be here with so many survivors of medical negligence who fought so hard for this day to win more justice for the people who come after. And I wanted to turn it over to them, but I do want to say a little something about this deal that we're celebrating today. The governor is expected next week to announce that he's signing legislation that will finally end the 47-year-old cap on compensation for injured patients. This is a cap that's been in place literally for 47 years at $250,000, and it has crippled the ability of injured patients to get access to justice and to get fair compensation for their injuries. The Fairness for Injured Patients Act was placed on the ballot and is still on the ballot thanks to the efforts of all these patients and the people who supported them. And because of the leverage of that ballot measure in November, there was an agreement reached between the medical insurance complex, the patient here, the lawyers, and others interested in this, that we would not go forward with the ballot measure if the governor signed a law that dealt with these issues. Well, I'm pleased to say that the governor has announced he is going to sign that law. And the law will do a couple of important things. It will increase the cap from $250,000 up to $1 million for wrongful death and up to $750,000 for personal injury over the course of 10 years. It's a graduated increase. But what's really important about this deal is it allows for separate caps if there is a medical provider involved, if there's a hospital or institution involved, and if there's a third provider involved. So it really allows up to 3 caps. As of next year, if someone is injured via medical negligence, they will no longer be limited to $250,000 for their pain and suffering, disability, lost quality of life, or for the wrongful death of a survivor. What they will be able to get is up $500,000 if there was a provider involved, $1 million if there was a hospital or an institution involved, and potentially a third cap if there was another provider who was unaffiliated with the first involved. Most cases will have 2 parties who are defendants, a doctor and a hospital. So we're looking at an increase in the cap for many people next year of up to $1 million if there's a wrongful death case, and up to $700,000 if there is a personal injury. And that is a big difference because it will allow people to have access to attorneys. Right now, it's impossible for people to get access to attorneys because with a total cap of $250,000, the attorney's fees have to come out of that cap, the expert witness fees have to come out of that cap, and they can be as much as $100,000. There's no economic ability to do this. This is all based on 1975 economics. So this was a landmark agreement between the medical insurance complex and the patients and consumers and attorneys involved on the other side to say, it's not okay to have a one-size-fits-all cap that's static. We need to adjust it. After 10 years, the cap will be adjusted every year with a 2% COLA, so we won't ever get into this problem again. This is a historic agreement, and I want to let the patients talk about it because it was their victory. So first I'm going to bring up Tammy Smith to tell her family story. Tammy is also a board member of Consumer Watchdog.
Good morning. My name is Tammy Smith. I am a patient advocate, a board member with Consumer Watchdog, and I am the mother of Alex Smith. I never could have imagined the year I graduated high school in 1975, a law would be enacted that would decades later profoundly affect my life. So this is my 20-year-old son, Alex, and he died in 2012 due to medical negligence. At Mission Hospital in Laguna Beach, Alex was given a lethal combination of medications, and then he was left unmonitored for more than 7 hours. And when Alex was finally checked on during morning rounds, he was found dead. He was already in rigor mortis. His hospital records indicated that he had slept well for 8 hours, but he wasn't sleeping. Alex lay alone in that hospital bed all night, seizing, vomiting, choking, and fighting for his life. But no one came to help him. The Orange County coroner determined that Alex had died due to acute polydrug intoxication. In other words, he had been poisoned to death at that hospital. So we wanted to seek justice and accountability for Alex's death, but the courthouse doors were closed for us because of MICRA, that 1975 law, which kept the value of our son's life at $250,000. We weren't looking for money because we knew there was no amount of money that could ease our pain and suffering. But we were looking to hold the negligent doctor and hospital to account, and we were hoping to enact change so this couldn't happen to another innocent victim. Not only were we devastated and grief-stricken over Alex's death, but we were shocked when we learned that we couldn't hold those responsible for his death to account. So for 10 years, I have crossed this state, sharing Alex's story with organizations and legislators and fighting for change. And last week, I had the distinct honor to stand before the Assembly Judiciary Committee in support of AB 35, and I am so thankful that not only did the bill unanimously pass out of committee, but it garnered a unanimous vote on the Assembly floor. Had AB 35 been in place when Alex died, we would have been able to go to court and hold those responsible for his death to account. So what does AB 35 mean to me? It means that families like mine will have access to justice and the judicial system, and we will be able to hold negligent doctors and hospitals to account. And it means other patients will be safer. And in cases like mine, because we had multiple defendants, it means the difference between $250,000 and $1.5 million beginning January 1, 2023. But most importantly, it means the difference between no justice and justice, accountability, and change. And while I grieve every day over the loss of my precious son, I am proud to know that part of his story is this monumental historic change for patients' rights, patient safety, and justice.
Hi, my name is Tracy Dominguez, and this is my beautiful daughter, Danny. We lost her life and my grandson's medical negligence. I am from Bakersfield. As a mom, all I wanted for my children was for them to achieve more than I have. Danny exceeded my expectations. My daughter was engaged to Xavier and expecting her first child. She was just 1 month away from her college graduation. She was so excited to start her new life and her family. We were 1 week away from her baby shower when she told me something was wrong. Demi told me she was having a hard time breathing. She had some vision blur, swelling, and high blood pressure. My daughter was a healthy young lady. We never expected anything could possibly go wrong. Demi did everything she could to get the medical attention for her and her unborn son, but her doctors ignored her. She called her OB, but he wouldn't see her. We went to our local hospital for help, but the doctor on call never saw her. He never went into her hospital room. He didn't assess her. He and her unborn child were discharged with an undiagnosis. But nothing had changed. After Demi was released from the hospital, she tried to see her regular OB/GYN again, but was turned away. I went with her on her regular scheduled appointment 2 days later, and after she was released from the hospital. And her OBGYN ignored her symptoms again. I was just a working mom, raising my family. I never anticipated becoming an advocate, but I did. I became an advocate mom not only for my child and grandchildren, but for other California patients and families. I would have not come forward, but I had to fight for change. I found myself testifying in legislation hearings, legislative committee hearings, and medical board hearings. There was nothing I wouldn't do for my daughter and her life. Therefore, I would do anything in my power for her passing to make sure that there would be accountability for other young mothers and their lives would be saved. And historical legislation will do that. Although it will not help my family, it will help other families to get access to the courtroom and justice for their families. I have dedicated so much time for this campaign for change in honor of my daughter Demi and my grandson Malachi. I will continue to work to make change in their memories. Thank you.
My name is David DeLeon, and I'm from Bakersfield. My story ended before it really began. I was just starting my life. I was engaged to a beautiful woman, and we were expecting our first baby, a baby boy. I remember being so scared, yet so excited to raise my son Malachi, my mini. We were planning for a baby, but then life came to a screeching halt. Unknown to my fiance and I, she was suffering from complications of preeclampsia. She could tell something was wrong, so she called her doctor, but he wouldn't see her. So she went to the hospital for care, but the doctors on call never saw her, nor did they assess her. He had her and our unborn child discharged without a diagnosis. We were told everything was fine, and we believed. Still trying to get help, my fiance tried to see her regular OB, but was turned away and told to wait until her scheduled appointment. So we waited and went to her regularly scheduled appointment 2 days after she was released from the hospital, only for her regular OB to ignore her symptoms. No one told us anything was wrong. Both doctors ignored her and denied her care. That same evening, I remember kissing her goodnight before we went to sleep and being awakened to find her in a full seizure. She died in my arms, but my son was still alive. They were rushed to the hospital where they were still trying to resuscitate her, but in my heart, I knew she had already passed. They took too long to deliver my son and then didn't immediately provide him with the medication he needed to treat his respiratory distress syndrome. They inserted an umbilical cord catheter, but it was placed incorrectly. His care consisted of a cascade of errors. The doctors knew that they needed to transfer him to a hospital which is over 200 miles away that could provide him with the care that he needed, but it took them 9 hours to finally airlift him. It was already too late. My son didn't have a chance. By the time he arrived at the children's hospital, I was told there was nothing more that they could do. So after spending some time with my son and my family, I was faced with a decision that no parent should ever have to make. I chose to take him off life support. Like my fiance, my son took his last breaths in my arms only 18 hours after his birth. Not knowing what to do, my family and I talked to many lawyers, but the only lawyer that would take our case required us to pay for everything. So after our family spent $30,000, we found ourselves out of money and out of a lawyer. We are now representing ourselves. This campaign was really important to me, and that is why I shared my son Malachi's story and dedicated so much of my time to this effort. Although legislation will not help my family, I know that it will help so many other families, and I find comfort in knowing that my son played a big part in making change for others. This is a change that was really needed. A lot of families fought for this. As a father, I feel honored that my family story did not end just as a statistic, but it contributed to a historical change to help Californians for generations to come. I will carry their loss with me forever. Thank you.
I'll give you a chance to move your cameras, and Ramirez will talk now.
Want to move the microphone?
Yeah, just
Yes.
Cam's fine, it's next.
Perfect. Evan, are we good just moving this?
Yes, please.
Perfect.
I did. Okay. Really? Okay. Wow.
We're good for the Zoom shot, guys? Yep. And are you set?
Good.
Good morning. My name is Annette Ramirez. I'm a patient advocate for Consumer Watchdog, and I'm from Manhattan Beach. On August 1st, 2012, I went into the hospital for a common surgery, a hysterectomy, and was expecting to get out the next day. During my surgery, the doctor cut my colon. Diligent post-operative care would have revealed that problem, but for more than 36 hours, the nurses failed to report my abnormal vital signs, which were the classic symptoms of a leaky bowel. Meanwhile, my doctor failed to adequately follow up and check my condition after the surgery. The result was that a severe infection had spread throughout my system, quickly causing me to go into septic shock. The septic shock was so intense, it burnt my body from the inside out, resulting in 50% of my body being burnt. I was placed in a coma for 4 months. I quickly developed gangrene, and my arms and legs began to blacken. This eventually led to the amputation of all 4 of my limbs. I ended up in the hospital for 2 years. 2 years away from my husband and our 2 young children, who at the time were 6 and 12. 2 years away from the life I once knew, and to no fault of my own. After this traumatic event, it became a top priority for my family and me to hold the negligent parties associated for their negligence in my care. This is when we learned the awful truth about California's law that caps the non-economic damages in a medical malpractice lawsuit at $250,000. Adding insult to injury, we found out that this law, enacted in 1975, had never once been adjusted for inflation. Since the day we were told that I would only receive a mere $250,000 for my 2 years in the hospital and the loss of all 4 of my limbs, my family and I have been fighting to prevent other Californians from facing the same outdated cap. And while the steel, AB 35, will obviously have no bearing on our own case, it will finally help level the playing field for other patients with catastrophic injuries, such as my own, and for families that have lost loved ones due to medical negligence. I feel that our efforts towards changing this archaic cap has finally been recognized by the California legislature and everyone involved. This 47-year-old cap has been a regressive delay of justice to so many who have suffered the effects of medical negligence. And in fact, this cap has been a true injustice for far too long. Finally, with AB 35, we are taking a step forward. California families who were previously blocked from the courts will gain access to compensation for their injuries, accountability for mistakes that harm them, and justice for themselves and their loved ones. Thank you.
And then
Mike, or you want to do it?
Yeah, sure, thanks.
Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, there you go. Cool. Ah, there you
Is it
go.
too high?
I think Barbara Boxer is shorter
If I-
than you, that's what.
That's fine.
If I, is it okay?
That's fine.
Okay, if I,
Barbara
just
Boxer's
these
box.
two,
It's literally Barbara
Oh,
Boxer's.
it is Barbara's box?
That's Barbara Boxer's.
Ah.
box, yeah.
well then, I'm honored for many reasons today. You're good on the Zoom, Evan? Great, thanks. So I just wanted to add a couple words. It's so incredibly moving to stand here today with these families who we fought alongside, some of them for more than a decade, to achieve this historic change with legislation that will finally allow families to get answers and accountability, respect, and justice when they've been harmed by medical negligence. And I want to thank Annette and Tammy and Michelle, Xavier and Tracy, and every one of the hundreds upon hundreds of families that have contacted our organization over the years with stories, horrific stories of medical negligence that have been compounded by the injustice that they face with this cap when they learn that not only were they horribly injured or lost a loved one to medical negligence, but then they cannot seek justice and accountability for that loss. So I just want to thank all of these families for everything they did, speaking to lawmakers, speaking to the media, having the courage to tell these tragic stories time and again, which I know is heartbreaking every time, to finally achieve change. It happened because of the work of these families, so we just want to thank them for having that courage. The cap as it stands harms every single Californian because it caps compensation for everything they lose because of medical negligence. But it disproportionately harms the most vulnerable Californians, those who are already being disadvantaged because of systemic injustice. And so this victory today is an added victory for all of those families right now who are locked out of the courtroom. That is low-income Californians whose economic losses are small, so they depend on the non-economic compensation that this cap will increase in order to get justice in the courtroom. The cap falls disproportionately on people of color who experience more medical negligence, have worse healthcare outcomes in a biased healthcare system, and then can't seek justice because of the cap. It falls, it has the highest impact on children and the elderly and the disabled who have no income and have only non-economic damages and are, again, locked out of the courtroom because of this cap that hasn't changed for 47 years. So while this deal is an historic win for all Californians, it's especially a win for the most vulnerable Californians. I want to point out two studies that came out recently that show more broadly the impact of this historic change on the healthcare system. Two studies that show that adjusting the cap will reduce medical errors in California and result in savings to the healthcare system and California taxpayers by updating the cap. The first study was a study released by the UCLA School of Public Health that found that California will see a 16% reduction in medical errors by adjusting the cap and experience a $245 million savings annually thanks to that reduction in medical errors. It's a huge change both in savings to the state, in savings to taxpayers who pay for Medi-Cal, and those savings come from, and also the intangible but such important savings by deterring medical negligence by allowing these cases to go forward. And the second study is a study that Consumer Watchdog conducted to find out how much more Medicaid, or in California Medi-Cal, is compensated in medical negligence cases in states that don't have a cap. And we found that Medi-Cal in California will receive approximately $18 million more every year in reimbursements for the care of patients who have been harmed by medical negligence by adjusting the cap. So two studies that just show the broader impact, not only for every individual family who might seek justice, but also for safer health care and savings to the state from reducing medical negligence. And we can provide anyone who's interested with information about those studies. They can email Carmen, C-A-R-M-E-N, @consumerwatchdog.org. One final thing, and then I'll turn it over for questions. The stories of everyone here today, and also the dozens of other families who have participated in this campaign, can be found at patientsforfairness.org, patientsforfairness.org. And with that, we'll open it up to questions.
First one simple, just say and spell your name for me.
Oh, Carmen, C-A-R-M-E-N-B-A-L-B-E-R, and I'm the Executive Director of Consumer Watchdog.
Got it, got it. Quick question, specifically, why is it, explain how it doesn't help the folks that went through this in the past, how the cap change doesn't help?
Sure, yeah, well, for two reasons. One, because everyone who spoke here today, their cases are over. So, you know, we're not retroactively
Got it.
changing what happened to them in the past. And the legislation doesn't take effect once it's signed until January 1st, 2023, so it'll impact on the cases going forward.
After that, okay. And then speak to how impressive it is to folks that it doesn't help them, and they came, you know, I fought to get this legislation, you know.
I mean, that is
happen.
truly why we're so grateful. I can't tell you how many families I've spoken to who have experienced, you know, the most tragic thing that could ever happen to a family, a loss of a loved one, a catastrophic injury like Annette experienced. And we're already at the point that they couldn't do anything to help themselves. But the number one thing I hear from so many families is, I don't want this to ever happen to another family. And that is why so many of these families, you know, I'm just awed by their courage and their dedication to come forward and fight this fight, even though, you know, the work that they're doing will never help themselves or their family. The people who have been on the front lines fighting to make this change want to make sure that what they went through never happens to another person.
We have good questions on the chat.
Yeah, Carrie Klein from KVPR asks, what impact do these patients and Consumer Watchdog have in getting the legislation written and approved?
All the impact
I would like to repeat the question a little bit.
Oh, yeah, so she asked from KVPR, public radio in Kern County, what impact the families here in Consumer Watchdog had on getting the legislation passed. I mean, Jamie mentioned at the beginning, the Fairness for Injured Patients Act, which is a ballot measure that would have adjusted the cap for inflation to about $1.2 million and created an exception in catastrophic injury cases and death cases that is headed for the November ballot. Every family in this room campaigned to make sure that that initiative got on the ballot and have been speaking out for several years now, in fact, in the course of that campaign about the need for a change to this law. So this compromise only happened because these families brought forward a ballot initiative to make this change happen. And I will mention someone who unfortunately couldn't join us today, Scott Olson, who is a board member of Consumer Watchdog and has been working with us for literally decades on this change. He's the proponent of the ballot measure because when he was 2 years old, Scott's son Stephen was injured on a hike in the woods, was denied a CAT scan that his family repeatedly asked, and was permanently disabled because of it. So Scott was a proponent of that measure, and in coming to this legislative compromise, he and the other proponents of the measure agreed to withdraw it if the deal were enacted.
Any other questions?
Any
on the
other
chat?
questions?
No?
Okay.
Real quick, could maybe some of the family members talk about, you know, what drove you guys to get involved in this, if you want to?
Yeah, for my family, this campaign has been so important. We did not want this tragedy to happen to another family. We knew how devastating Micra and that cap was on our family, and the inability for us to seek justice, and also knowing that there was no change yeah, at the hospital, the doctor, there was no change, because we couldn't go to court, we couldn't expose their wrongdoing, and so for us, you know, Alex, our son Alex was the kindest, most loving young man, and he loved helping other people. And so I get the strength from him, and being able to go out and share his story, it's difficult, but knowing that change is happening by sharing his story and his tragedy has given us strength, and we just never ever wanted this to happen to another family.
For me, you know, I didn't know anything about the cap when this happened to my family. So it was very important that we stopped from another family going through it, because we had no idea what the cap was. I was just a working mom trying to make a life for my children. So it meant everything to change it so no other family would have to experience how hard it is to get justice. To get justice in the medical board, to get justice in the courtroom. So we have fought, and we will continue fighting for other families and other, so no one has to experience the heartbreak that my family has endured. And I get my strength also from my daughter and my grandson. And now I just honor them through this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Something that kept driving me was just sticking to the plan. And the plan was to help a lot of people. We've all experienced it here, how devastating it can be to your family. It's not just you and your immediate family members. It's a wave that just echoes through the whole family, and it destroys families. It brought us to our knees, and it really, just that traumatic experience, we just really didn't want anybody else to really go through what we went through, because you can't even put it into words, the amount of emotions that you go through over the course of the years, and it's always a constant process of grieving. You're never going to stop grieving, and we just really just didn't want it to happen to anybody else. So that's something that kept driving me, and just not letting my family die in vain, pretty much.
Annette, did you want to say anything, or? It's up to you.
Sure.
Okay, thanks.
I echo everything that everyone has said. I stand in solidarity with my colleagues, my friends here. And while my children didn't lose their mother, they lost a big part of their mother. You know, I can no longer drive. I can no longer go to work every day or take them to school or do all the things that I used to do, run and play with them. So when this happened to our family, it was almost like we were going down a rabbit hole of things we had no idea about. I had never heard about a $250,000 cap or any of these things until obviously this happens to you or a member of your family. And I continue to seek justice for other people in California, because what our family went through was so, and is still very difficult. But we were so lucky that we have such a close-knit family and friends and our community that have supported us through this, that I continue to do what I'm doing, probably for my children, and also for all of the other patient advocates that I have met and heard their stories. And they're so horrifying and so upsetting that I would never want any other family to suffer this. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I anything else from online, Bear? No. Okay, good, so that's it, everyone.
Mhm.
Thank you for attending the press conference.
Thanks.